Welcome in, I'm Artris, and in this video, I'm going to be bringing you a comprehensive guide to the OP06 pre-release tournament, which is happening March 8th through March 14th. If you're unfamiliar with a pre-release, basically what it entails is it's your first look at the upcoming set, Wings of the Captain, and you're given 6 packs to build a deck out of from the cards within the packs themselves. You can usually bring your own leader, but if your LGS doesn't allow that, then you'll be playing with the Rainbow Luffy, which everyone will be on the same equal playing field. So it's very important at that point to draft carefully for your deck. So that's the whole point of this video. If you find anything in this video useful or informative for your pre-release, please make sure to drop a like and a sub. These videos take a little bit of time to edit and make, so any support you guys can give is greatly appreciated. Also, if you'd like to talk about One Piece card game outside of the YouTube comments, please make sure to join the Discord. The link is in the description. A couple of quick notes before we get into the set review itself. I'd like to talk about how you should evaluate cards when putting them into your deck, and that is the G.R.A.P.E method, which this is your priority checklist when looking at cards. Like, what should you add to your deck based off of what is on the G.R.A.P.E method? So the G is for game winners. These are cards that will, when they come down on the field, will usually just win you the game within a turn or two. Usually these are like your huge bombs or something that your opponent can't answer. R is removal, so if you can find cards that are able to answer threats on the board or take care of other cards that your opponent may have, those are very high priority to get into your deck. A is for advantage, or otherwise known as card draw, so any kind of card that can help strengthen your hand, build out your hand. Even filtering your hand is considered an advantage, so those are cards that you should highly prioritize as well. Then we have cards that are protection, so what that means is any kind of 2Ks or any kind of blockers you should add to your deck for the most part, because those will help you stay alive, and those are very important to making sure that you're not dying too quickly to whatever your opponent is throwing your way. An E for everything else. This is going to be based off of the type of deck that you're building. So maybe if you're playing Zoro, you're looking to play weenies, or if you're playing any other leader, you might be looking to play just some like vanilla stat lines like 3/5s or 5/7s. So whenever you're building your deck, just take these into consideration when drafting. Of course, with having such a limited pool, you are going to be taking cards that are probably going to be duds at times. So obviously try to get as close to the G.R.A.P.E method as you can, but it is there as a simple guideline. And then the rating system for the set review, I'm doing a simple S through F. The S stands for bombs. These are going to be cards that will win you the game pretty much on the spot and are going to be extremely hard for your opponent to remove. You're going to want to add these to your deck. If you see them, please make sure to add them. Do not skip out on these. A cards are your threats. These are cards that will probably require 2 cards from your opponent's hand every time they attack, or maybe they can't even counter out of some of this stuff. Threats also include cards that can handle other things on the board, like maybe a spot removal, or maybe something that is a really strong blocker, has a lot of effects on it. So I would consider any of those threats. B are just really good cards that your opponent probably can answer in some way or form, or requires 1 card per turn to counter out of. However, if they stay on the board long enough, they will become a problem. But generally, if a good card comes down, like a B-level card comes down, your opponent's not too worried at the time, but as time goes on, those will become problematic. C cards are your playable cards. As the name suggests, these are cards that you're probably going to add to your deck, but probably aren't most keen on adding them initially, just because there probably isn't too much going on with them. They're probably cards that have either a decent stat line, like maybe a 4-cost, 5,000 attack body, but maybe not much of an effect. Just something to fill out the deck with, but regardless, you can still play them, and they might pose a little bit of a threat once they're on the board. And then F are your duds. These are cards that you should not include in your deck at all. Cards you're going to want to avoid. Simply either they don't have enough synergy with what you're wanting to do, or they're just not cards that have good stat lines, and so it feels like a waste to put them in your deck. So with that, let's get into the set. We're going to be going over the reprints first and then into the colors themselves. So first off, we have Buggy, which is a reprint from OP03. It is a 1-cost, 3,000 power body. This character cannot be KO'd by / attribute cards, and then on play, look at the top 5 cards from your deck, reveal it to 1 red event and add it to your hand, and then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. I'm going to say that this is an F tier card for limited, simply because On play, you're looking for a red event, and since it is locked to a color event, there's not a lot of red events in this limited set that you're going to want to draft in your deck. So if you're playing Zoro, this might be a decent card to consider because of Zoro's effect, but any other leader, it's an F tier. Next, we're looking at Big Mom, Charlotte Linlin, the 10 cost, 12,000 power body. On play, if your leader has the Big Mom Pirates type, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to your life cards. Then trash up to 1 card from the top of your opponent's life cards. I actually think that this card lies anywhere from A tier as a good threat to S tier, depending on the leader that you have. So if you're playing at a store that was only allowing you to bring the Rainbow Luffy and you get this card, it's really good because Rainbow Luffy states that this leader is a card with all the names, characteristics, and attributes of the card. So Big Mom Pirates is one of those that falls into line here. So we're able to get the effect off of this Linlin. Also, if you're playing Katakuri or maybe the Yellow Big Mom, this is a really S tier card. Any other leader, it's going to be an A tier card because you're not being able to use the effect. However, the body is so big that it's hard for people to take care of. So because of that, it's anywhere from A to S, depending on your leader. Next, we have Sugar, which is a green card from OPO4, 2 cost, 0 power. Opponent's turn, once per turn. When your opponent plays a character, if your leader has the Don Quixote Pirates type, rest up to one of your opponent's characters, then rest this character. And then the on play is rest up to one of your opponent's characters with the cost of 4 or less. I think this is a playable card. It is playable because of the on play effect. You're not going to get the second half of the effect with the once per turn unless, of course, you're playing Rainbow Luffy or a Don Quixote Pirates type, but typically you're not going to be playing those for the most part. So on play, rest up to one of your opponent's characters with the cost of 4 or less. This is a 2 cost, rest a 4 character, which you can use to go for game. So because of that, I think it's playable, but typically you're going to not want to include this because it doesn't do much outside of that. Next, we have Miss All Sunday, a 5 cost, 5,000 power body. On play, add up to 1 card from your Dawn deck and rest it. Then if you have 6 or more Dawn cards on your field, draw 1 card. I think this is a really good card. I think it is a B tier card because you're able to get card draw off of it, you're ramping a little bit, and it also has a trigger effect, which is Dawn -2, you may play this card. So getting a body out of your life for -2 Dawn is not the worst thing in the world. Plus, if the effect goes off, you're able to draw a card. So yeah, I think this is a good card. Next, we have the 7 cost Borsalino, which came from the last set OPO5. On play, place up to 1 character with the cost of 4 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck. I'm going to say that this is a threat. It is an A tier card for me. Being able to bottom deck one of your opponent's characters and then have this pretty chonky boy out there is nice to have the following turn. It's really hard for your opponent to answer, and having to get 2 2Ks to be able to bare minimum get out of this is a pretty good card to be on your side of the field. Next, we have Rebecca, which is a blocker, and on play, add up to 1 black character with the cost of 3 to 7 other than Rebecca from your trash to your hand, then play up to 1 black character card with a cost of 3 or less from your hand rested. I think this card is playable, but not very playable in my opinion. It is, at the end of the day, just a blocker. The fact that this is color locked to a black character of 3 to 7 from the trash to hand, and then you have to play a black character with a cost of 3 or less from your hand, there's not going to be that many black cards to choose from for the most part for the set. Obviously, the ones that are in this set are decent, but I think if you're looking for synergies, this is probably not the card you're going to want to run, unless, of course, you're just looking for blockers and you need something on the field. So, of course, I would say that this is a playable. You might want to consider adding it to your deck if you come across it. Otherwise, just save it because the artwork alone is really good. So, on to red, we have the leader Uta, which is when attacking, you may trash 1 film card from your hand to give up to one of your opponent's characters -2,000 power during this turn, then add up to 1 Dawn card from your Dawn deck and rest it. I'm going to say that this card is playable. However, you're probably not going to want to use this leader, and the reason why I say you're not going to want to use this leader is because your hand in Limited is already small, and to dwindle it even further by using the effect doesn't feel too good. Yes, you're able to -2,000 power to something and then also add a Dawn card from your Dawn deck and rest it, but it specifically requires a film type card, and then you have to just get rid of that card. So overall, C tier, it is technically playable, but I don't think you'd want to play this. Next, we have Inazuma, which is a 4 cost, 5,000 power body. If this character has 7,000 power or more, this character gains Banish. I actually think that this is a strong threat, despite the fact that it is a 4 cost, 5,000 power body. The fact that you only have to put 2 Dawn on this, it's at 7,000 power, so requiring your opponent to counter 2 cards out of their hand, and it has Banish. I'd say that's a pretty good upside. Although the initial stat line isn't that great, I would run this. Next, we have Ivankov, which is a 5-cost, 6,000 power body. On play, look at the top 3 cards from your deck and play up to 1 Revolutionary Army type character card with 5,000 power or less, then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. I think this is a C tier playable. I don't think that there's a fair amount of Revolutionary Army cards for you to consistently get this effect off in Limited. However, the stat line isn't the worst, and yes, it doesn't have a counter, which does suck, so that's why I'm putting it at playable. Otherwise, if it had a counter, I might put it at a higher tier playable, but technically, yeah, you could still run this, I suppose. Next up, we have Baron Omatsuri. This is an on-play, play up to 1 Lily Carnation card from your hand. This is an F tier. There's not really any reason to play this. Next, we have Gaspard. This is a 6-cost, 8,000 power body vanilla. This is a very good card, and I said good, but this is actually, to me, a low A tier card because this on curve is really hard for your opponent to answer. There's no way that they can swing into it without using their entire Dawn the next turn for the most part. They're not establishing a body if they need to take care of this. And they have to give you 2 2Ks per turn or use a blocker. So this card is a threat in my opinion, even though it is a vanilla. Next we have Saga, which is a 4-cost, 5,000 power body. Dawn ×1 when attacking. This character gains 1,000 power until the start of your turn, then trash one of your film type characters at the end of this turn. I actually think that this is a very good card, and the reason why I say it's a good card is because it is a 2K counter, but it's also a utility 2K, which you can play down if you need a body. So not a lot of 2Ks have the same utility that some of these other cards have, but because this can be potentially a body to play down, I say it's a good card. Next up we have Shanks, which is a 10-cost, 12,000 power body. On play, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 10,000 power or less. This is clearly, to me, the best bomb in the set. This is S tier easily, having a huge stat line of 12,000 power, and then immediately on play, you get an effect off that affects the board, taking care of any character on the board for the most part. The only thing that this doesn't really touch is Shanks. So this card alone is probably going to win a lot of people games, so whoever drafts it, congratulations on probably winning, unless of course you don't draw it, so that's always a thing to consider. But yeah, this is clearly an S tier. This is probably the best card in a limited set that you can ask for. Next up we have Schneider. This is a 3-cost, 5,000 power body with a 1K counter on it, and I'd say this is a low B tier. It's a good card to have. You're going to want to play this on curve. At worst, if you get it late game, you have a 1K counter in hand. So it's not the worst thing to play, and I would probably put it in your deck if you get it. Next up, we have Shiraya, which is a blocker, and when attacking and on block once per turn, this character's base power becomes the same as your opponent's leader until the start of your next turn. I actually think this is a really good card. I'm not going to put it into an A tier because it doesn't really provide too much of a threat. Mostly you're going to be using this to block. However, you can use the when attacking effect to get it up to 5,000 power for free. So I think it's a good card. You can use it a multitude of different ways, which makes it very flexible. And honestly, if I see this, I'm really happy to get it. Next up, we have Douglas Bullet, which is if your leader has the film type, this character gains blocker. It's a 6-cost, 7,000 power body. I'd say if you're running the Rainbow Luffy, this is an auto include. It is a really good card. However, if you're not able to get the blocker effect off of this, it's still a good card at the end of the day. A 7,000 power body is still strong. Once again, this is requiring your opponent to get rid of 2 cards per turn from their hand, which a small hand size is definitely going to be a thing in limited. So yeah, I'd say this is a good card. Next, we have Top Musica, which is activate main once per turn. You may rest one of your Uta cards. This character gains plus 5,000 power during this turn. This is technically playable. It is not necessarily one that I want to add. Along the lines of the Ivankov that we just came across, this is a 5-cost, 6,000 power body. However, this one has a 1K counter, so it is technically playable, but even more so than the Ivankov. So if you're deciding between those two, I would probably add this one. But you're not going to use the effect, and just consider this as a vanilla. Bear King is if your opponent has a leader or character with a base power of 6,000 power or more, this character cannot be KO'd in battle. Once again, this is just like the last card we saw. I think this is a playable card. It has a counter on it, and it's just basically a 5-6 vanilla. You're not going to be coming across, I wouldn't assume rather, you're not going to be coming across like a Newgate or a red purple Luffy, so you're not really going to be able to use the effect. However, if you do, then I guess this is a really good card, but yeah, the likelihood of that happening is very slim. All right, next up we have the 2-cost 3,000 power body Monkey D. Luffy. On play, look at 3 cards from the top of your deck, reveal up to 1 film type card and add it to your hand, then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. This is a searcher for film, and because the consistency of getting enough film cards to make this worth running is not really there, I'm going to say it is an F tier card. Next up we have Ratchet, which is a 1-cost 0-power body. On your opponent's attack, you may trash any number of film type cards from your hand. Your leader or one of your characters gain plus 1,000 power during this battle for every card trashed. This is an F tier. It doesn't have any good stat line. The effect is very much typecast to film, which is not very good for this. And then also, you're not wanting to get rid of cards from your hand because of just what I've talked about up till this point. Hand size is very important in this game, and especially in Limited. So getting rid of cards is not necessarily what you want to see. Next up, we have Lily Carnation, which is a 4-cost 0-power body. Activate main once per turn. You may trash one of your characters with a 6,000 power or more. Play up to 1 film type character card with 2 to 5,000 power from your trash rested. This is an F tier. I don't know why you would ever want to use that effect in Limited or just in Standard. That doesn't really seem very beneficial to me. However, I might be a little bit short-sighted here when it comes to the deck building side of this, but as far as Limited goes, this is an F tier. Then we have Raise Max, which is a 1-cost 2,000 power body. Activate main. You may place this character at the bottom of the owner's deck. Give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 3,000 power during this turn. I'd say this is a C tier card, and the reason why it's a C tier card as opposed to maybe like a B tier card for me is that it doesn't have a counter, and then on top of that, it doesn't pose a threat to your opponent outside of the immediate effect that you get from it, which the effect is really good. I would try to include this in my deck if I need some room for maybe some removal in some regard, because this technically counts as a 1-cost removal. Your opponent's probably not going to be countering out of something if you attack into a body with this, like maybe you use the effect minus 3,000 to a body and then you attack into the body, they're probably not going to counter out of it. So Raise Max for me is a decent C removal. Then onto the events, we have a 2-cost Meteor Strike of Love. This is a main or counter. You may add 1 card from the top of your life cards to your hand. Up to one of your leader or character cards gains plus 3,000 power during this turn. This could be used as a finisher, so I would consider running this. It's technically playable. The effect of adding a card from the top of your life cards to your hand, you have to be careful with and just obviously assess the situation of what is currently going on in the game. But I could see a situation where maybe you're running Kid, right? And you use this effect to go for lethal. You get 2 swings in, and then you have the plus 3,000 power from this for both of those at the cost of just taking 1 life. So yeah, I'd say this is a playable card. Gum Gum King Kong Gatling, which is a 2-cost event, and it's a main event. Up to one of your leader or character cards gains plus 3,000 power during this turn. Then if your opponent has a character with 7,000 power or more, up to one of your leader or character cards gains plus 1,000 power during this turn. This is also a very good playable card. It is one of those that can be situational for like a kid or going for lethal. It's very similar to the last card, except you don't have the counter effect. And then on top of that, you don't have to take the life for this one, so I'd say they're very comparable. The trigger effect, though, is, however, really good here. KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 5,000 power or less. So if your opponent attacks into you and this is in your life, you can get rid of a blocker or maybe like a small threat. So I would say that this is a high tier playable card. Then we have the 3-cost event, Blue Dragon Seal Water Stream. It's a main. KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 5,000 power or less, and then the trigger says KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 4,000 power or less. I'd say this is also a playable card. The red events that we've seen so far aren't the worst, but they're also not the best. So this is a 3-cost removal spell that you could use on a blocker if you're going for game. So 3 cost for removing a blocker is a little expensive in my opinion. Usually you want to see removal for blockers at around 2. However, if you're needing something, this is a decent card to add into your deck. So it is a playable card, especially because there is a trigger. All right, on to green, we have Hody Jones, which this leader is activate main. You may rest this leader, rest up to one of your opponent's Dawn cards or characters with the cost of 3 or less. Then you cannot add life cards to your hand using your own effects during this turn. I'm going to say this is an F tier card because you're not going to want to use that effect really ever, because you're probably going to just want to use your leader to swing, especially in limited. So don't play this card. Next, we have Perona, which is an activate main. Once per turn, choose one. Rest up to one of your opponent's characters with the cost of 4 or less, or give up to one of your opponent's characters -1 cost during this turn. This is a decent playable card. The only reason why I wouldn't put it higher is because it is 4 life, and in this limited format, 4 life leaders do struggle just a little bit, especially when they do have to go against a card like Kid. Also, we have another card in the set, which we'll get to eventually, in Yamato, which is a double attack card. This will also pose a problem for Perona. The effects are decent. Like rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. Really good. The minus cost isn't really effective in a set that doesn't have good synergy with like popping minusing effects. So I'd say if you're looking for a leader that's resting cards, this isn't the worst thing in the world, but there's probably better leaders for you to play. And then speak of the devil, here's the Yamato that I was talking about. It is a double attack, activate main once per turn. If your opponent has 3 or less life cards, give up to 2 rested Dawn cards to one of your characters. I'm going to say that this leader is actually like A to S tier. I'm going to put it in the S tier. Maybe it's a little bit spicy for what it actually could be. But the thing is, it is a double attack leader. And the fact that this card has double attack in a constructed meta and still is very strong is going to be even stronger in the limited meta where 2k counters aren't readily available. And then on top of that, blockers aren't prevalent as well. So this is a very strong card. I would definitely consider playing this. Of course, 4 life is detrimental to a lot of these leaders, but I think Yamato just doesn't care about that. So I would play this. I actually might try this if I can. And to be honest, I would imagine that a lot of LGSs are going to be asking to be playing Rainbow Luffy because of Yamato or Kid. So yeah, that's how much of a threat I think Yamato actually is in a limited environment. Next we have Arlong, which is a 4-cost, 6,000 power body. On play, you may trash 1 card from your hand. Up to one of your opponent's rested leader cannot attack until the end of your opponent's next turn. This card is decent. The downsides to this card is it doesn't have a counter power on it. The other downside is that you have to trash a card for the effect, but the effect is really good. Don't get me wrong. So I'm going to actually put this in a B tier, even though trashing a card typically is a bad thing. No counter is typically a bad thing. The other thing that it has that going for it is that it has a trigger, which is rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. So if this comes out of life, resting a blocker, resting a threat, really strong. So it is very versatile in that regard. So I'm going to say it's a good card. And the stat line is a vanilla stat line at the end of the day. Next we have Ikaros Much, which is a 5-cost, 6,000 power body. On play, if your leader has the new Fishman Pirates type, play up to 1 Fishman type character card with a cost of 4 or less from your hand. Then add 1 card from the top of your life cards to your hand. This is a C tier card for me. I don't think you're going to really be pulling that effect off very often, so you just have to consider this as a 5-cost, 6,000 power body vanilla, which there are better stat lines, like for instance 5-cost, 7,000 power is what a typical stat line will be for a 5-cost character. So that being said, it's playable. You might want to consider it. If you're running out of options, this is one that you could probably put in and be fine with. Next we have Kami, which is on play. Look at the top 4 cards of your deck, reveal up to 1 Fishman or Merfolk type card other than Kami and add it to your hand. Then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. This is an F tier card. Typically, searchers are not going to be that viable in a limited format. Next we have Koshiro, which is a 3-cost, 0th power body. On play, set up to one of your slash attribute characters with a cost of 4 or less as active. Then you cannot attack a leader during this turn. This is not very playable to me. I'm going to put it in the F tier. Then we have, is it Gyro? Euro? I'm not really sure. That's a sandwich. So technically this guy doesn't look like a sandwich. But 1 cost, 2,000 power body on KO. Rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less. If you're running Zoro, maybe this is viable. But otherwise, it is an F tier for me. Zio is a 2-cost, 3,000 power body. Dawn ×1 when attacking. If your leader has the new Fishman Pirates type, set up to one of your Dawn cards as active, and then this character gains plus 1,000 power during this turn. Then add 1 card from the top of your life cards to your hand. I'm going to say that this is a playable card, and the reason why it's playable, the only reason why it's playable, is it is a 2k counter, and there aren't a lot of 2k counters in this set in the common slot, and so getting this is definitely nice to see. Next up is Daruma, which is a Dawn ×1 when attacking once per turn. If your leader has the new Fishman Pirates type, set this character as active and this character gains plus 1,000 power during this turn. Then add 1 card from the top of your life cards to your hand. If you're running Rainbow Luffy, I would consider this. Otherwise, I don't really think that this is a good card to include. It is barely playable, so it is on the low side of C, almost F. Dosun is a 3-cost, 4,000 power body. When attacking, if your leader has the new Fishman Pirates type, this character cannot be KO'd in battle and gains plus 2,000 power until the start of your next turn. Then add 1 card from the top of your life cards to your hand. This also is very similar to the last card we just saw, and so to me, it is a playable, but barely. It's anywhere from the F to C tier, but just to be a little bit more nice on this card, I'll say it's a C tier card. Next up, we have Hachan, which is a 4-cost, 5,000 power body. body, and it is just a vanilla with a trigger on it. It says play up to one Fishman or Merfolk type character card with a cost of 3 or less from your hand. This is a also playable card, but you're probably not going to want to put a stat line of 4 for 5 into your deck. You'd rather see a 4 cost 6,000 power body. So if you can get those instead. But this is one that you would put aside and say, okay, I need like 5 more cards to fill out the deck, and I've basically filled out what I need to. Is this card worth running? Yeah, potentially. So I'd say it's a playable card, more playable than the last 2 cards we saw. Next up, we have Hammond, which is a 2 cost, 2,000 power body, and it's a blocker. This is a good card in the sense that it is a blocker. So I would put this into your deck. It's a B tier. Now, B tier cards, of course, being good. I said at the beginning of this video that they might be a little bit of a threat or whatever it may be, but also blockers are good cards because protecting your life is very valuable, especially in limited. So I'm going to say that this is a B tier, not necessarily high B, just like middle of the road B tier card. You're always going to want to include this in your deck. Vendor deck in the 9th, we have on play, you may trash 1 Fishman type card from your hand or 1 Noah Ark from your hand or field, KO up to one of your opponent's rested characters. This is a 2 cost, 2,000 power body. This is a very specific on play. You have to have a setup for this. I think the effect in a constructed environment might be decent. However, in limited, this is really hard to pull off. So it is an F tier. Next up, we have Hyozu, which is a 4 cost, 6,000 power body. Activate main once per turn. Rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less, and this character gains plus 1,000 power during this turn. Then add 1 card from the top of your life cards to your hand. I think this is a good card. It has a vanilla stat line. It doesn't have any counter, which does suck at the end of the day. And the effect you could pull off for maybe going for a stronger lethal. I typically will advise to not take life from the top of your life cards in a limited set because your opponent's going to be doing that for you regardless. So the effect is not the best thing in the world to be pulling off unless you're trying to go for game, I would imagine. But the 4 cost, 6,000 power body is good. Next up, we have Hody Jones, which is a 7 cost, 8,000 power body. It has rush, and then on play, rest up to a total of 2 of your opponent's characters or Dawn cards. Then add 1 card from the top of your life cards to your hand. This is an S tier, and the reason why it's an S tier is because it has rush, and then on play, resting 2 of your opponent's characters or Dawn cards. So if they have Dawn up for a counter event, now they can't use it, or if you're going for lethal, you can rest 2 blockers. This is insane. Yeah, I'd say that this is a must add to your deck if you can get it. The stat line is really good in my opinion. A lot of people aren't going to be expecting rush, and because of that, this card is extremely valuable. Next up, we have Ryuma, which is a 4 cost, 6,000 power body. On play and on KO, KO up to one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 4 or less. This is a very good card. It is a high B tier card for me. The stat line is a vanilla stat line with an on play and on KO effect that could be useful to remove opponent's threats or blockers or whatever it may be. I'm going to put this at a high B tier. Next up, we have Watatsumi, which this is a 6 cost, 8,000 power body. Now, I know that a card like Ryuma, which has an on-play and on-KO effect, and then a decent vanilla stat line, I put it at a B tier. However, with Watatsumi, I'm putting this at an A tier. Any kind of 6 cost, 8,000 power body. We saw one of these earlier in this set. These are going to be A tiers for me because these are cards that are hard for your opponent to answer, and they can carry a game if you don't see any other top end. Next up, we have a counter event, which is a 1 cost counter event, the Billion-Fold World Trichiolocosm. Probably butchered that name, so let me know in the comments. It is a up to one of your leader or character cards gains plus 2,000 power during this battle. Then if you have 8 or more rested cards, that card gains an additional plus 2,000 power during this battle. And the trigger says KO up to one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 3 or less. I think this is actually a really good card. The specification of 8 or more rested cards, it can be Dawn cards, it can be character cards. I even think that maybe a leader counts as a card to be rested. So you can use your leader swing, your character swings, and then your rested Dawn to count as those 8 cards. And it's basically a rad beam for easier than just a rad beam. So I think that this is a very strong card, and maybe your opponent won't expect a 1 cost plus 4,000 power counter event. So yeah, this is a good card. Next, we have a 4 cost event, which is a main choose one. It's called You Ain't Even Worth Killing Time. Rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less, or KO up to one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 6 or less. I think that this is a good card. We saw some removal in the last set in, I think it was a Don Quixote Pirates green type card that was a 5 cost. It was like rest something and then KO something. This is a 4 cost that just does one or the other. And it also has a trigger, which is activate this card's main effect. I think this is, once again, a B tier card. The fact that it has removal on, if it can remove the 6 cost, 8,000 power bodies is really strong and only for 4. So yeah, I think this is really good. Next, we have Shark Arrows, which this is a 2 cost event. KO up to 2 of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 3 or less. It's an okay card. Technically, this is a C tier. You could play it, but you're not really going to care too much about 3 cost characters in this game that are rested. Usually what that means is if it's a 3 cost character that's rested, it is a 3 cost 5,000 power body, and you can just swing into those anyway and either get cards from your opponent's hand or just KO them that way. So if you're desperate enough to remove something without having to swing into it, sure, this card is decent. So it is playable technically, but I would probably not include it in my deck. Then we have the Arc Noah. It is an on-play, rest all of your opponent's characters, and then the trigger is play this card, so the trigger also rest all of your opponent's characters. I don't know how I feel about this card, to be honest. It is a 6 cost card to rest all the opponent's characters, and for what? I don't really know. I can see the trigger effect being really good, but you're relying on this being the trigger effect to use it, so I don't think I would want to play this, to be honest. I would say it's an F tier, sadly. I think the idea is really cool, but I don't think you would want to include a stage that costs 6 into your deck. All right, on to blue, we have Vinsmoke Reiju, which is a blue-purple leader. Once per turn, your turn, when a Dawn card on your field is returned to your Dawn deck, you may draw 1 card. I don't think that you want to run this leader, so I'm going to put it at an F tier. Minusing Dawn is something that is hard to recover from. You're going to want to have as much Dawn per turn as possible in Limited. Sure, you're able to draw a card with it, but 1, it's a very specific thing to do, and then 2, once again, you're not going to want to minus your Dawn while playing Limited. Aramaki is an 8 cost, 8,000 power body blocker, and activate main. Once per turn, you may trash 1 card from your hand and place 1 character with a cost of 2 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck. This character gains plus 3,000 power during this turn. This is a threat to me, and the reason why it's a threat is that it is a very strong attacker, but also it's a hard blocker to get through. I think that this is now the strongest blocker in the game. So the effect is you may trash a card from your hand and place 1 character. I think you have to do both in order to gain the plus 3,000 power, but I think that there's a way to just get around it. You could do your own characters if you want. There's a couple of 2 cost blockers you could bottom deck in this format, so it is versatile in that sense. Playing this down and having a blocker is really nice. So the versatility of this card, to me, makes it an A tier threat, maybe towards the bottom half of the A tier. Not necessarily like, if I see this come down, I'm probably going to be using it as a blocker more often than not. So it's not really putting pressure on your opponent, but it is harder for your opponent to get more attacks in because of it. Next, we have Gion, which is a 4 cost 5,000 power body. Your turn, once per turn, when your opponent activates an event, your opponent must place 1 card from their hand at the bottom of their deck. I think this is a really good card, and the reason why, 2 reasons. The effect is actually pretty decent. It has a okay stat line with 4 cost 5,000 power body, but also on top of that, it is a 2k counter. So all of these taken into consideration makes this a very good card for me. It is probably the most playable 2K out of all of the ones that we've seen so far. Then we have Kuzan, which is a 3 cost 5,000 power body. On play, draw 2 cards and place 2 cards from your hand at the bottom of your deck in any order. This, for me, is an auto include. Being able to filter out your hand, getting 2 fresh looks at cards, and then putting the worst cards from your hand into the bottom of your deck is so good, so very good. It's a vanilla stat line. It doesn't have a counter, but it doesn't matter because you're going to be playing this for the effect. Sakazuki is a 5 cost, 6,000 power body. On play, place up to 1 character with a cost of 2 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck. This is okay. There's not a lot of 2-costed characters that you're going to want to use this effect on. I did say with the Aramaki that there are a few blockers that are 2 costs, so you could use this to just bottom deck a blocker if your opponent has it out on the field. The other thing that's a downside to this card is that it doesn't have a 1k counter on it, so it will be a dead card in hand, so you have to play it. Otherwise, it's just kind of taking up hand space. I'd say it's playable, C tier. Next up, we have Charlotte Pudding, which is a 4 cost, 4,000 power body. On play, your opponent returns all cards in their hand to their deck and shuffles their deck. Then your opponent draws 5 cards. I think this is a good card, but it also could come to bite you in the butt. There's a couple of things to take into consideration here. One, if your opponent has more than 5 cards, you probably want to use this effect. The other thing, though, is that if your opponent has just bad cards in hand and then you just refresh their hand to give them something even better, that could be a downside. You don't really know what you're getting out of it, but I think that the effect is good enough to just play it regardless. It's very annoying, especially if your opponent might have like 7 or 8 cards in hand and then somebody plays this down. They've been taking all of their life, they have a huge hand size, and they play this down. It's like, okay, now all the advantage that you have is now gone, and you've taken all your life. So because of that, I think it's a B tier card. Zeph is a 3-cost, 3,000 power body. Your turn, when your opponent activates blocker or an event, if your leader has the East-Blue type, you may trash 4 cards from the top of your deck. This is F tier for me. There's not really a reason to play it. It's not, there's no stat line that makes this worth running, and sure, the effect, if you're able to use it, you could trash 4 cards, but for what? You don't really care about that in Limited. Then we have Sengoku, which is a 5-cost, 7,000 power body. It's a vanilla. There's no stats to it other than that, and I say it is a good high-tier B card. It's not quite a threat per se, but it is a good card to have on your side of the field. It's almost pushing the A tier, though. Tashigi is an on-play. Look at 5 cards from the top of your deck. Reveal up to 1 Navy-type card other than Tashigi and add it to your hand. Then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. Once again, searchers aren't really viable in a limited format, so I'm putting it at F tier. Next up, we have Suru, which is a 5-cost, 4,000 power body. On play, you may trash 2 cards from your hand. Your opponent returns one of their characters to the owner's hand. This is an interesting card. I think it's playable only because it's a 2K counter. You're not really going to be using the effect really that much unless you're in a situation where you could go for a game and you're like trying to get something off the field, but regardless, that's still not the best way to do it. Spending 5 Dawn, then trashing 2 cards feels really bad, so keep this in your hand for a 2K counter. Next up, we have Tokikake, which is a 2-cost, 3,000 power body. Dawn times 1 if you have 4 or less cards in your hand. This character cannot be KO'd in battle. It's not the worst card in the world. It's decent in Zoro. It's playable in Zoro. Otherwise, I would probably put it in F tier, but because it is playable in a few decks, and the effect is not bad, I would say that it is technically playable. Next, we have Jaguar D Sol, which is a 2-cost, 3,000 power body. On KO, place up to 1 character with a cost of 2 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck. This is an F tier, not really worth running in my opinion. Borsalino is a 2-cost, 4,000 power body. If you have 5 or less cards in your hand, this character gains blocker. The stipulation for this to be a blocker kind of sucks. Having less cards than 5 in hand is not where you want to be. And then on top of that, this doesn't have a counter, so I'm putting it at F tier. Monkey D. G.R.A.P.E, 5-cost, 7,000 power body. Dawn times 2, when attacking, if you have 4 or less cards in your hand, your opponent cannot activate blocker during this battle. I want to say it's a B tier card. The reason why I'm not technically like gun-ho on it being a B tier card per se is because it doesn't have a counter, so it is a card you're going to have to play regardless, and you have to find time to play it. So sometimes you don't get that, and especially if it's in life and you're looking for counter power out of life, or you're drawing into something that you need counter power for, this is not what you want to see. However, the effect is decent. It does have a vanilla stat line at the end of the day, so I'm putting it at B tier. Next up, we have a 2-cost event, Amano Murakuma Sword, which is a main. Place up to 1 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 2 or less, and up to 1 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 1 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck in any order. This is the Rob Lucci effect for blue, which is just bottom decking now. So this is okay in standard, or constructed rather, but in limited, it's really hard to pull this off to be able to get characters that you really care about getting rid of down to 2 and 1. So I'm putting it at F tier. Next up, we have But I Will Never Doubt a Woman's Tears, which is a 1-cost event. Main up to 1 of your leader or character cards gains plus 1,000 power during this turn. Then reveal 1 card from the top of your deck. Play up to 1 character with a cost of 2, and place the rest at the top or bottom of your deck. And the trigger is play up to 1 character card with a cost of 2 from your hand. This, to me, is an F tier. It doesn't really serve much purpose in limited. Then we have a 7-cost event, Gravity Blade Raging Tiger. This is a main. Place up to 2 characters with a cost of 6 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck in any order. And the trigger is place up to 1 character with a cost of 5 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck. I say that this is a good card. The only downside to this card is that it costs 7. However, you're getting rid of 2 bodies on the field, or if you have it in life, the trigger is also decent as well. So I'm putting it at B tier. I probably would want to include 1 in my deck if you draft multiple. I don't think you would want to include multiple, but it is a good card regardless. Next up, we have White Snake, which is a 2-cost counter event. Up to one of your leader or character cards gains plus 1,000 power during this turn and draw 1 card. I think it's playable. The plus 1,000 power isn't the best thing in the world, but it does last for the rest of the turn, and you also get to draw a card on top of that, so not the worst thing. And then if it is a trigger in life, you look at the top 5 cards from your deck and place them at the top or bottom of your deck in any order, so you can stack your deck if it is in life. So that's not the worst thing. I think it's very playable. It's almost good. The only reason why it's not good, in my opinion, like a B tier card, is because of the plus 1,000 power being the only counter power you're able to get out of this for 2. That kind of sucks, but otherwise, if it was like maybe plus 2,000, I'd put that at a B tier, but it's a playable C tier card, high C tier for me. All right, on to purple. We have Vinsmoke Ichiji, which is a 4-cost, 4,000 power body. Activate main Donna -1. You may trash this character if your leader has a Germa 6/6 type. Play up to 1 Vinsmoke Ichiji with a cost of 7 from your hand or trash. I'm going to say this now, and this applies for the rest of the purple cards for the most part that are in the Vinsmoke family Germa 6/6 archetype. If you're coming across any of the little Vinsmokes, I don't think those are worth running. So I'm going to put this at an F tier. If you are able to draft like a god and get all of the Vinsmokes, the mini ones, and then also the evolution types, then sure, this might be worth running, but I think the fact that you have to have both of them to make this really decent is F tier for me. Here is the 7-cost, 7,000 power Vinsmoke Ichiji, the one that it would evolve into technically. So on play, if the number of Dawn cards on your field is equal to or less than the number of your opponent's field, give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 2,000 power during this turn, and this character gains rush. I think that this is a threat. There's going to be many times where you have the same amount of Dawn as your opponent, so being able to give this character rush is very strong, and then the minus 2,000 power is very handy to trade into a body. So yeah, I think that this is it B tier or is it A tier? I am not quite sure, to be honest. I would say it's probably a low A tier. It's a threat that the rush alone is really good, but the fact that it gives something minus 2,000 power is also very strong. Next, we have Vinsmoke Judge, which is an 8-cost, 8,000 power body. On play, Dawn -1. You may trash 2 cards from your hand, play up to 4 Germa 6/6 type character cards with different card names, and 4,000 power or less from your trash. Activate main once per turn, Dawn -1. Rest up to one of your opponent's Dawn cards. This is a playable card. It's almost a good card. The reason why it's a playable card and not anything else to me is because you're basically paying 8 for 8,000 power, and so it is a vanilla stat line that is a worse vanilla stat line. You're not going to be using any of the on play or activate main once per turn effects unless, like I said, you got a god pack and you have all of the Germa 6/6 cards. So because of that, this is a C tier card. It's technically playable, but would I want to add it to my deck? Probably not. Next up, we have Vinsmoke Sora, which is an on play. You may trash 1 card from your hand if the number of Dawn cards in your field is equal to or less than the number of your opponent's field. Add it to 1 Vinsmoke family type character card with 4,000 power or less from your trash to your hand. That effect never going to come in really handy. The only reason you're going to add this to your deck is because it's a 2K counter, so it is a C playable card. Vinsmoke Niji, this is another one of the mini Vinsmoke family cards. Dawn -1, you may trash this character. If your leader has a Germa 6/6 type, play up to 1 Vinsmoke Niji with a cost of 5 from your hand or trash. F tier. The 5 cost that you would get from your hand or trash from the other effect, though, on play, if the number of Dawn cards on your field is equal to or less than the number on your opponent's field, choose 1. KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 2 or less, or return up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less to the owner's hand. This is a good card. Being able to have the option of doing either one. The fact that you're going to be around the same Dawn as your opponent, you're probably going to be able to pull this effect off, especially in late game when you're both at 10, and you can just use this effect. Return up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less to the owner's hand. That's pretty good. I think that's pretty good in my opinion. So because of that, I'm putting it at a B tier. Vinsmoke Yanji, another mini, so I don't even have to read the effect here. I'm putting it at an F tier. Then we have Vinsmoke Yanji, which is a 4-cost, 5,000 power body. If the number of Dawn cards in your field is equal to or less than the number of your opponent's field, this character gains 1,000 power, and then it also has blocker. I think this is a good card. It's a B tier card. It's a blocker, and then on top of that, if the game goes late and you're on 10 Dawn, then it gains an extra 1,000 power. Vinsmoke Reiju, don't have to read this one. This is one of the mini Vinsmokes, so F tier. And then we have Vinsmoke Reiju, which is the 4-cost, 5,000 power body. On play, if the number of Dawn cards on your field is equal to or less than the number on your opponent's field, and you have 5 or less cards in your hand, draw 2 cards. Yeah, I think this is a solid B tier card. It's good, simply because you're able to draw cards off of it. And once again, you're probably going to be at around the same Dawn as your opponent. Next up, we have Eldorado, which is a 5-cost, 7,000 power vanilla. This is a good card. All of these vanillas that are 5-cost, 7,000 power, for the most part, are going to be, in my opinion, a B tier, unless I forget and put them in some random tier after this. But yeah, I'm going to probably always put these in the B tier. Guild Tesoro is a 5-cost, 6,000 power body. On play, Dawn -1. If your leader has a film type, add up to 2 film type character cards with a cost of 4 or less from your trash to your hand. The fact that it has to be a film type is not the best, so I think that this is a playable card technically because the stat line isn't the worst in the world and it has a 1k counter on it, but the effect is pretty useless and limited. Then we have Cosette, which is a 1-cost, 0 power body. If your leader has a G.R.A.P.E 6/6 type and your number of Dawn cards on your field is at least 2 or less than the number on your opponent's field, this character gains blocker. This is an F tier card because it is a situational blocker that requires you to have 2 less Dawn cards than your opponent, which that's really hard to do in a game of limited where you're not really minusing your Dawn that much. Next up, we have Shiki, which is a 2-cost, 1,000 power body. It's a blocker, and then on play, if you have 8 or more Dawn cards on your field, draw 1 card and trash 1 card from your hand. This is a really good card. It's a blocker that filters 1 late game. So yeah, I think that you would want to auto-include this B tier. Next up, we have Zephyr, which is a 7-cost, 7,000 power body. On play, Dawn -1. Negate the effect of up to 1 of your opponent's characters during this turn. Then if that character has 5,000 power or less, KO it. This isn't that bad, to be honest. Even though the stat line isn't great, like a 7-cost, 7,000 power with no counter effect, being able to just KO a 5,000 power or less body is decent. I would probably put it at like a high C. I don't think it's quite good. It's okay. I'm not sure if I want to include this. This is one of those I would have to ponder on. And depending on my deck layout and like what I've drafted so far, yeah, I would say that this might be a good card, but probably C tier. Count Battler is a 2-cost, 3,000 power body with on play Dawn -1. Rest up to 2 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 2 or less. This could be a decent card to add into your deck if you expect your opponent to run a lot of blockers. As we've seen so far, there are only 2-cost blockers in the set. There might be some as we go along in different colors, but as of right now, there's only 2. So this is a very situational card for sure. It's playable technically if there are more 2-cost blockers that we'll come across, but I don't think I would really want to add this to my deck. Next up, we have Kamazo, which is a 4-cost, 5,000 power body. Your turn, once per turn, when a Dawn card on your field is returned to your Dawn deck, KO up to 1 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 2 or less. This is a good card. I'm going to put this in my deck because it's technically playable. Also, on top of that, it is a 2k counter power. So, good card overall. On to the purple events, we have a 4-cost main event called Black Bug. If the number of Dawn cards on your field is equal to or less than the number on your opponent's field, place up to 1 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck. And then the trigger is place up to 1 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck. This is a playable card. It is a removal for late game. The trigger is not awful. I'm probably not going to want to include this in my deck for the most part because there are better removal cards you probably will be able to draft into. But if this is like the only removal that you are able to get out of your packs, then sure, include it potentially. But for the most part, just a general rule of thumb, these cards, like the removal event cards, you're taking a turn off from playing a body and establishing a threat. So just consider that, you know, you'd probably want more bodies in your deck than not. So yeah, it's technically playable, C tier. G.R.A.P.E 6/6, this is a 1-cost event main. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck. Reveal up to 1 card with a type, including G.R.A.P.E, other than G.R.A.P.E 6/6, and add it to your hand. Then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order, and the trigger is draw 1 card. I don't think this is playable. It's an F tier. Searching out certain archetypes is not very viable and limited. Then we have a stage, which is a 1-cost stage called Kingdom of G.R.A.P.E. You may trash 1 card from your hand and rest of the stage. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck. Reveal up to 1 card with a type, including G.R.A.P.E, and add it to your hand, and then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. Once again, being able to search for stuff in limited that is a certain archetype isn't very beneficial, especially if you're not getting a lot of these cards, so F tier. All right, on to black. We have Gecko Moria Leader, which is a Dawn ×1. When attacking, pay 2. You may trash 1 card from your hand, trash 2 cards from the top of your deck, and play up to 1 Thriller Bark Pirates type character card with a cost of 4 or less from your trash. This is not a viable card in limited. However, this will probably be the most played card in constructed. That doesn't make it very good limited though, so I'm putting it at F tier. We have Absalom, which is a 4-cost, 5,000 power body. On play, you may return 2 cards from your trash to the bottom of your deck in any order. KO up to 1 character with a cost of 2 or less. If there's a blocker on the field, this is decent. It's probably worth playing because of that, so it's a high C tier playable for me. The stat lines aren't the best, though, in the world. Once again, paying 4 for a 5,000 power body, you could be doing that for 3 instead. Once again, it's not the worst thing in the world. G.R.A.P.E, which is a 2-cost, 3,000 power body on play, on KO. If your leader has the Thriller Bark Pirates type, draw 2 cards and trash 2 cards from your hand. If you're running the Rainbow Luffy, this is really good. It's probably a high C tier, being able to draw cards for 2. Almost like just a B tier, like an auto include in my opinion. But if you're not running Rainbow Luffy, then I don't think it's really worth running because you're probably not going to be running Gecko Moria. So yeah. Oars is a 4-cost, 7,000 power body that's insane. However, this character cannot attack. Activate main, you may KO one of your Thriller Bark Pirate type characters. This character's effect is negated during this turn. I'm putting this card at F tier. It's requiring you to have a certain archetype and KO that archetype consistently for this card to be able to attack, and because of that, this card is not good. Jigoro of the Wind is a 2-cost, 3,000 power body. On KO, up to one of your leader or character cards gains plus 1,000 power during this turn. This is good in Zoro, but any other deck, it's F tier. Kumasi is a 2-cost, 3,000 power body. Dawn times 2, your turn. This character gains plus 1,000 power for every 5 cards in your trash. This card could be a surprise playable card. It seems like it's a bad card, but it's really good in Zoro, and then it's decent in other decks. Because as the game goes along, if this card is sitting on your side of the field, and say you've trashed a fair amount of cards, your Dawn times 2, so it's 5,000 power, plus then also every 5 cards in your trash, plus 1,000 power, so it could be like a Dawn times 2, and now it's a 6,000 power body or 7,000 power body swinging at you. Would be decent. So it's technically playable. Is it good? No, but it's got potential. Next, we have Gecko Moria, the boogeyman of OP06. It is an 8-cost, 9,000 power body. On play, choose up to 1 character card with a cost of 4 or less, and up to 1 character card with a cost of 2 or less from your trash. Play 1 card and play the other card rested. This is an A-tier threat. It's not quite a bomb. The specifics of this effect in Limited are a little bit harder to pull off consistently. It's not impossible. And also the cards that you're pulling from your trash might not be that effective or that strong. It's still a good card overall, being able to recur things from your trash to be able to play them on the field and establish more threats. And then also the 9,000 power is just absurd to be able to counter out of consistently. So that is an A tier card for me. Not quite a bomb though. Next we have Cerberus, which is a 2-cost, 2,000 power body, and it's a blocker, so this is a good card. Just include it in your deck. Next we have Sai, a 3-cost, 4,000 power body. If your leader has the Dressrosa type and is active, this character gains plus 2,000 power, so very specifically built for Rebecca and Rebecca alone. So that makes it an F tier because you're not going to be putting it in your deck. Tarlon is a 2-cost, 3,000 power body. On play and on KO, trash 3 cards from the top of your deck. Not good, not playable, F tier. Dr. Hogback is a 4-cost, 5,000 power body. On play, you may return 2 cards from your trash to the bottom of your deck in any order. Add up to 1 Thriller Bark Pirates type other than Dr. Hogback from your trash to your hand. This is technically playable just for the stat line, but the effect is likely never going to be pulled off in Limited. Victoria Sindri is a 1-cost, 2,000 power body. On play, if your leader has the Thriller Bark Pirates type, trash 5 cards from the top of your deck. You're never going to be using it for that. It is a 2k counter, so because of it, it is a C tier. Next up, we have Brooke, which is a 6-cost, 6,000 power body. On play, choose 1. Trash up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less, or your opponent places 3 cards from their trash at the bottom of their deck in any order. So the clear choice here would be effect number 1, trash up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. It doesn't even say KO it, by the way, so just keep this in mind when you're playing Constructed. This should take care of the 4-cost Borsellino blocker, because it's not KOing it, it's trashing it. So I think this card is... I want to say it's a low B tier card. I like the removal, and the stat line is not the best, and it doesn't have a 1k counter, but the fact that it has 6,000 power body on it, and it can KO... Sorry, not KO, it's trashing an opponent's character with 4 or less cost is pretty good in my opinion. So I'd say it's a low B tier, maybe C. It's like one of those that's kind of like on the line, so consider this one for your deck for sure. Next up we have Perona, which is a 4-cost, 5,000 power body. On play, if your opponent has 5 or more cards in their hand, choose 1. Your opponent trashes 1 card from their hand, or give up to one of your opponent's characters -3 cost during this turn. This is a very good card, in my opinion, for two reasons. One, it's a 2K counter, but then also, this is a 2K counter that probably has the most utility out of any of the 2K counters that we've seen so far. The fact that your opponent has to trash a card from their hand if they have 5 or more is very annoying. You cannot recur it as easily as you can in Constructed, so that is something to keep in mind, so maybe you want to keep this in your hand instead. However, both effects, either 2K counter or using the trash one card from your opponent's hand, are very nice. Next, we have Lola, which is a 4-cost, 6,000 power body. It's just a vanilla, a very good card. It's on curve, very hard to answer at the next turn. Being able to play this on turn 2 going second is very nice. On to the events, we have a 2-cost main and counter event called Shadows of Asgard, which your leader gains plus 1,000 power during this turn. Then you may KO any number of your Thriller Bark Pirate type characters with a cost of 2 or less. Your leader gains an additional plus 1,000 power during this turn for every character KO'd. And then the trigger is draw 2, trash 1. I'm going to put this in an F tier. It's not really that good of a card to be running. The trigger is nice, but that's about it. Then we have a 3-cost counter event called Nothing at All. You may add 1 card from the top of your life cards to your hand. Your characters with a cost of 7 or less cannot be KO'd in battle during this turn. And the trigger is activate this card's counter effect. This is technically playable, but I don't like the cost on this. 3 cost for protecting your characters is decent, right? But you're having to leave 3 up. So that's a little inefficient or using your Dawn for that turn, so I don't like that for that reason. I'm going to put it at playable, but I'm not going to be adding this to my deck. Negative Hollow is a 2-cost main event. Trash 1 card from your opponent's hand, and the trigger is activate this card's main effect. I don't really think this card's worth running, to be fair. You could argue that you could run it because, like, on your 2 Dawn turn, what are you really doing with 2 Dawn? Probably not much. So maybe you want to add 1. I think it's playable. It's kind of an annoying card for sure, and the activate main effect on the trigger is also nice. So yeah, technically this is playable. If I'm running out of space, or if I'm desperate for cards to add to the deck, I might want to consider adding this in. Otherwise, it's probably not going to be in my deck list. Then we have Thriller Bark, which is a 1-cost stage event. Activate main, you may pay 1, and then rest this stage. If your leader has the Thriller Bark Pirates type, play up to 1 Thriller Bark Pirates type character card with a cost of 2 or less from your trash rested. Once again, archetypes in Limited aren't consistent, so F tier. All right, we have Isa, which is a 1-cost 0 power body. On play, look at up to 1 card from the top of you or your opponent life cards, and then place it at the top of the bottom of the life cards. This is a playable card. You're probably never going to want to use that effect. You're probably just going to keep this in hand because it is a 2K counter, so always add 2K counters to your hand if you can. Next up, we have Inuarashi, which is a 4-cost 5,000 power body. Dawn times 2. When attacking, you may trash 1 card from your hand. KO up to 1 of your opponent's characters with a cost equal to or less than the number of your opponent's life cards. And then the trigger is if your opponent has 3 or less life cards, play this card. I think that this is a decent playable card. The reason why is that you can play it for free from life, and especially if your opponent has 3 or less, which is going to be likely, this is good to come out of life and then be able to play for free. The stat lines are okay, and then the effect could be useful at times, although probably not very likely to be useful. But because of all of that, I think it's a strong playable card. C. Onami is a 2-cost 3,000 power body. On play, up to 1 of your leader or character cards gains banished during this turn, and then the trigger is KO up to 1 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. This is a very good card. I'm actually putting it in A tier for what it is, and the reason why I'm putting it in A tier is because of the banish effect on play. It's a 1K counter in hand, and then also in life, you're able to KO a 5-cost or less character. All of those things are absurd, and you really want to have this card for sure if you can add it to your deck. I know that it sounds a little weird to be putting a 2-cost 3,000 power body, but it's not that's good. It's everything else on the card. This coupled with some other leaders, maybe like a Kid going double attack banish, or like a Yamato double attack banish, is just insane, and it makes other cards extremely viable, extremely strong, and that's why this is a threat. Next up, we have Kamakiri, which is a 3-cost 4,000 power body. Activate main once per turn. You may place 1 stage with a cost of 1 at the bottom of the owner's deck. KO up to 1 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 2 or less. And the trigger is if you have 2 or less life cards, play this card. I don't think this is very viable. It's playable technically, but not very viable. So I'm going to put this at a C tier. The reason why it's not very viable overall is that if you play this card, you have to invest more Dawn in it for it to be able to attack into your opponent. So I don't like that per se, and that makes it a C tier. Next up, we have Kawamatsu, a 3-cost 5,000 power body. When attacking, you may trash 2 cards from your hand, add up to 1 of your characters with 0 power to the top or bottom of the owner's life cards face up. And the trigger is if your opponent has 3 or less life cards, play this card. The trigger's fine, the stat line's fine, the effect is not very useful for the most part, and it doesn't have a 1k counter, unfortunately. I'd say that this is a playable card, and if you're needing some decent stat lines, that this is one that you should add in immediately. Like if you're, once again, at the end of the day, if you're like 45 cards into your deck and you need a few more to add and you're like, oh man, I need something that has a decent stat line, this is one of the cards that you should probably do it with. Next up we have Kikunojo, which is a 4-cost 6,000 power body on KO. If your opponent has 3 or less life cards, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards, and the trigger is if your opponent has 3 or less life cards, play this card. I think this is a really good card. It's a high B tier for 2 reasons. One, the effect is insane, so the longer that the game goes on, the less incentive your opponent has to attack into this card, and it's constantly asking your opponent if it's going face for 2k counters. 2, the trigger is very nice. If your opponent has 3 or less life cards, play this card from your life for free. So yeah, I like this card overall. I'm going to be adding it to my deck. Hopefully I can get a few during my draft. Genbo is a 3-cost 5,000 power body. It's just a vanilla. It's a good card. This is more playable than the other one that we saw because of the 1k counter. Next up we have Yori, which is a 2-cost 0 power body. On play, you may add 1 card from the top or bottom of your life cards to your hand. Add up to 1 card from your hand to the top of your life cards. So this is a good card for a couple of reasons. Being able to alter your life is very nice. And then also it is a 2k counter, so another utility 2k. We love to see those. So if you can get this card, make sure to add it. Next up we have Momonosuke, which is a blocker. And on play, add up to 1 of your Land of Wano type characters other than Momonosuke to the top or bottom of your owner's life cards face up. By the way, the stat line of this is a 5-cost 6,000 power body. The blocker is very good. The fact your opponent has to swing above this or below this makes this card very good and makes the math a little bit more awkward for your opponent. So it is a good card. It's a B tier card for me. Next up, we have Tenguyama Hetetsu, which is a 1-cost 2,000 power body. No stat line other than the trigger. Up to 1 of your Land of Wano type leader or character cards gains plus 2,000 power during this turn. It's an F tier. Not very playable. Denjiro is a 5-cost 6,000 power body. Dawn ×2. If your opponent has 3 or less life cards, this character cannot be KO'd by effects. And the trigger is if your opponent has 3 or less life cards, play this card. I think this is a high C tier card. The game state of 3 or less life cards is very easy to achieve. However, if it was KO'd in general, then that'd be great. It'd be a B tier card, but because it's KO'd by effects, that makes it a C tier card because there's not a lot of removal in this set, and honestly, you don't really want to invest 2 Dawn on this for it to be guaranteed to not be removed from the field. So I would say that this is a C tier card, probably a higher C tier card overall though. Nekomamushi is a 4-cost 5,000 power body. Dawn ×2. This character can also attack your opponent's active characters and then trigger if your opponent has 3 or less life cards, play this card. This is a very obnoxious card. I think it's a good B tier card because it can attack active characters, and so that alone makes it very strong. Even though the stat lines aren't the strongest, the fact that the effect is very good makes it a very good card for me. Next up, we have Braham, which is a 3-cost 4,000 power body. Activate main once per turn. You may place 1 stage with the cost of 1 at the bottom of the owner's deck. Rest up to 1 of your opponent's characters the cost of 4 or less. You're not running many stages, so the effect isn't very useful here, and the stat lines aren't very good. So I'm putting it at a C tier, low C tier, almost F, but yeah, I think that this is one that you're probably never going to want to add to your deck. Raizo is a 3-cost 4,000 power body. When attacking, you may trash 1 card from your hand, rest up to 1 of your opponent's Dawn cards, and then trigger if your opponent has 3 or less life cards, play this card. Yeah, once again, these 3-cost 4,000 power bodies are technically playable, but they're very low C tier playable. You're not going to really want to immediately add these to your deck. Like for me, when I make my deck list, when I'm like going through and drafting my deck, I will put cards to the left or the right based off of like, oh, the left cards are all the cards I want to add to my deck and the right cards are maybes. This is one of those that you put on the right. It's kind of like a maybe card. If I'm desperate to add more cards to the deck at the end of the day, then yeah, add it in. But otherwise, you're probably going to leave this out. Next up, we have Rocky, which is a 1-cost 1,000 power body effect. If you have a Shandian warrior type character other than Rocky, this character gains blocker. Situational blockers are never really good in my opinion, so I'm putting it at an F tier. Next up, we have Wiper, which is an on-play. You may place 1 stage with a cost of 1 at the bottom of the owner's deck. Look at 5 cards from the top of your deck. Reveal up to 1 upper yard or Shandian warrior type card and add it to your hand. Then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. This card is only good because of the stat lines, and it's playable. It doesn't have any counter power, which does suck, so it wouldn't be a good card in my opinion because of that, and the effect is not very good. There's better vanillas that you can add to your deck. It's playable. C tier. If it had counter power, it would be a B tier for me. On to the yellow events, we have a 0 cost counter event. You're the one who should disappear. Counter is you may trash one card from your hand. Up to one of your leader or character cards gains plus 3,000 power during this battle. And the trigger is if you have 0 life cards, you may add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards. Then trash 1 card from your hand. The effect is very good, especially if it's the last card in life, and the fact that you're able to pitch dead cards from your hand to play this for counter power is very strong. This is a B tier card. You should always include these if you can. And especially now that yellow's getting stuff, yellow just seems to be overtuned. But in the scope of a limited, you should absolutely include this in your deck. Next, we have Reject, which is a 4-cost event that says choose 1. KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less, or if your opponent has 1 life card, deal 1 damage to your opponent, then add 1 card from the top of your life cards to your hand. The trigger is draw 1 card. I think you should include this. This is a very good card because it has removal on it. It has a way to go for lethal, and also the trigger is draw 1 card. So at worst, if it comes out of your life, then you're drawing a card to replace it. So yeah, I think this is a B tier card. I'm always going to try to include the rejects, maybe 2 if I can, probably no more than 2, but this is an event card that is very strong. Then we have the Arc Maxim, which is a 1-cost stage event. Activate main once per turn. You may rest this card and one of your Enel cards. KO all of your opponent's characters with a cost of 2 or less. This is an F tier because there is not an Enel card in this limited format, so the effect is never viable. Then for the secrets, we have the Roanoa Zoro, which is a 9-cost, 9,000 power body. When attacking once per turn, pay 1 Dawn, set this character as active, and then activate main once per turn, pay 2 Dawn, set this character as active. So this is basically a triple attack character with 9,000 power body on it. So this is an S tier bomb. Okay, so at the beginning of the set review, I said that the Shanks was the best bomb in the set. Now that we've gotten to the end and I've seen this Zoro, this is now the best bomb in the set. This card will 100% win games for people once you play it down. Being able to hit somebody for 3 times with base power 9,000 is insane. There's no way your opponent can counter out of all of those, and so this is a great go for game card. If you throw this down on the field, you are very likely winning. Then we have Sanji, which is a 9-cost, 9,000 power body. On play, reveal 1 card from the top of your deck and play up to 1 character with a cost of 9 or less other than Sanji. Then place the rest at the bottom of your deck. This is a A-tier threat. It is a 9,000 power body that brings another body out with it, so you're getting really good value out of it. And who knows, that body that you could throw out could be the Zoro that we just saw. And now you have 2 9,000 power bodies on the field that are going to win you the game. So yeah, this Sanji is an A-tier threat for me. And then to round it out, we have a treasure rare, which is a Nami, 1-cost, 1,000 power body. Activate main once per turn. Give up to one of your Arrested Dawn card to your leader or one of your characters. It's a solid card. I think it's playable. If you get this card, you're very lucky because this card is very hard to find. I think it's the pull rates are insane for this, but if you do get it, you probably should add it to your deck for 1 to flex, and then 2, the effect is not that bad. So it's a playable card, so C tier. So there you have it. There is Wings of the Captain OP06 set review for Limited in its entirety. Hopefully you guys gain some good knowledge from this and can walk away with a couple of the prize cards. Let me know if this helped you in any capacity. Would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching the video. I know it was a lengthy one, and we'll be on to some new OP06 material later on for this set, so stay tuned. Make sure to like and sub as well. Helps out the channel so much. Thank you all so much for the support, and I'll see you in the next video.